I'm going to try to move along fairly quickly here because I know we're running pretty late. And I think part of it is because we're all tackling subjects that I think for every, if not most or every speaker, these are new presentations we're putting together, not rehashing something. We were asked to do something specific for this conference. And it's a kind of accumulation, looking back, looking forward. And so all of us have looked at this and said, my God, there's so much to do. How do we cover 40 years of work and then look ahead at the same time? And as a result, we're getting behind. And I'll try to move along quickly, but I'm in the same spot. I want to thank BV and the other organizers for asking me to come forward and try and do this for rock art. And so let me just make clear what I'm going to do and not going to do. And that is I am going to look back at where we came from in rock art studies, who have been important people, important work that's been done going into the 1800s and moving forward. And I'm going to look ahead at what new trends and things are happening and where I think progress is being made and going to be made, and also where we have challenges. What the talk is not is a review, a picture review of all of rock art in Alberta. We're not going to every site and looking at every image, and it's not a new analysis of existing or known rock art. It is my interpretation of what the organizers were looking for. So I hope everybody will get something out of it. We'll move along here. I want to start by paying homage to our sort of ancestors and all this. But first, a few slides that set the scene for rock art studies, and that is, first of all, just a general map. This is a little bit out of date. There's been a couple of things discovered since this. It's about 10 years old now. But this gives you a good idea of rock art distribution in the province. And when I talk about rock art, I'm talking about petroglyphs and pictographs specifically, and I think you all know what we refer to here. I am not talking about, and Margaret was going to, address, she did address this a bit, things like ribstones and petroglyph boulders and things like that. So this is strictly paintings on walls and carvings on walls or on isolated rocks, and what we all call petroglyphs and pictographs. So there's about 30 of them if you count writing on stone and the area surrounding it as one, which you pretty much have to do, otherwise it becomes really unwieldy. There are hundreds of individual rock art sites within the Writing-on-Stone region, but again, that could be broken down to, if there's one here and another one 5 meters over, is that 2 sites or is it 1 site, and so on. There are places at Writing-on-Stone where there is areas that are a kilometer long and it's 1 site with hundreds and hundreds of images, and other places where a single horse is 1 site and then 20 meters away a teepee is another site. So counting in that area is dangerous, so we won't do it. So 25, 30, 34, I mean, it depends. Some are unverified still, some rock art sites. Some have not been visited in a long time, so we don't know if they're actually still there, but that's a rough idea to give you a sense of number. I'm not going to talk about this, but I want you to just know that there's been a fair bit of work in Alberta rock art, and generally Northern Plains rock art, such that there are what we call traditions of rock art styles recognized that share commonalities, just like typing artifacts. We type rock art. And to get an explanation of these various categories, if you want one, please visit the book by James Keyser and Michael Klassen. They give a very good and detailed summary of all these different types, but here they are for you. They're all represented in Alberta to various degrees. The Plains ceremonial and biographic would be probably the most common, and vertical series, foothills abstract, probably the most rare. In toto pect is the one that's fairly rare as well, and it's regarded by many people, including me, as probably the oldest rock art in the province. And while I'm on that, I should just say we have almost no dating of actual rock art sites. There are, of course, content, like you see here. You can see a horse and a rider, and so you know the horse is in the last couple hundred years, and so that gives us a relative age. And there are other scenes that we think, for stylistic reasons, are relatively old. People like Keyser, Klassen, and myself think that some of the what are called in toto pecked, these fully pecked images, could be in the order of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years, something like that. But it is nothing more than a guess and a little bit of a relationship between places like Wyoming and Montana, where there has been some better work on dating some of these in toto pecked scenes. So, whoops, skipped one. We're going to talk about where we have come from in terms of our rock art studies. And hold on, let me get my notes. I'm going to start with the first reference anybody made to observing rock art in the province, in writing that is. And this was by a guy named James Dewdney, who was sent by the American government out to meet the Blackfoot and try to start some treaty negotiations with them. And he moved through the coulees leading up to the Milk River, and he had several Kainai guides with him. And as they got to the canyons and cliffs of the Milk River, he wrote this in his journal, which I've reproduced here. I won't read the whole thing, but you can see he's talking about the images as representing coups, that is, feats in war and horse stealing, things like that, which is actually quite accurate, as we would now interpret much of the rock art. A lot of it is coup related, that is, celebrating your own personal achievements in rock art. But of course, he was traveling with Blackfoot guides. His guide specifically was a Piikani guy named Little Dog, and we think the Little Dog probably provided quite a bit of information to James Dewdney about what it was he was looking at and what it meant. So that's the first written record that I know of, 1855. And as I noted in one of the earlier slides, all the firsts in terms of rock art research are pretty much associated with writing on stone. And in a rather sad way then too, so was the first recorded incidents of vandalism. I suspect there were others that no one recorded. So, but this guy, Fred Bagley, who was on the famous March West of the Northwest Mounted Police in 1874, he was a 15-year-old trumpeter, and he says in his notes, he said, of course, all of us wrote our names on the rocks, which is what everybody would have done at that time, I'm sure, and many people still do. So he has the distinction, I guess, of being the first recorded person to vandalize a rock art site. The photo you see there is not, and as far as no one has found the names of Bagley or his colleagues who made their names, whoever they were. We've not ever found any of them. The oldest ones found in the writing on stone area so far is this one, which is it's P Stark, but it stands for Parley. We did some research and found out who he was, so 1886. That's 2 months older than the graffiti by Plockington, which was the previous record holder. The first photographs are really important, of course. Photographs of rock art are really important data sets, and unfortunately we don't have a lot for the last 100 years or so in Alberta. Which is a real shame, and I would love to find more. And you know it's out there. I mean, people undoubtedly have photographed rock art. And I don't just mean 1800s, 1900, 1910, 1920. Why not? Why do we not have photographic records? Many of them are in people's basements, and they're probably regarded as unimportant. But I'm hoping more will come out over the years, and because they are really important records. I'll show you what I mean here in a moment. So this guy, Constable Wilson, many of you may have heard of him. He's a fairly famous guy. He ran the post at Standoff for many years. He was Northwest Mounted Police for a short time, for about 3 years, and went to the post at Writing on Stone in Milk River for a number of times. And if you've seen the classic photographs of the Milk River, the post there at Police Coulee, he's the one who shot all of those. And they're all on the Glenbow website. You can go see them all. Many of you have seen them. There are many, many classic shots. He was quite an avid photographer. He also took lots of shots of Blackfoot teepee camps. He learned to speak Blackfoot quite well. He was an Indian agent for many years for both the Piikani and Kainai. And then he eventually went back to running his fort at Standoff and died there in 1944, not all that long ago. Quite extensive records. There's meters of things on shelves and hundreds of photographic images. That's the best I could do for a photograph of Wilson himself. Doesn't show you much, but here are some of the pictures he took. He went to Writing-on-Stone in 1880. He went, as I said, made a number of trips, but in 1885 he went with his camera and took the first known photographs of any rock art in Alberta that I'm aware of. And he photographed 8 panels in total at the site, a number of pictographs and a number of petroglyphs, not all in one location. He did travel around. He got into Verdigris Coulee, for example. Sorry, not Verdigris. He got into Rocky Coulee, or Van Cleve as it's called, photographed in there, as well as the main panel, as it's often called, DGOV2. And these are a couple of his images. The upper right there is a shot of his signature, which appears in Rattlesnake Cave. And that's 1887, which was a different trip to the park, not the one where he was photographing. And inside that cave is rock art, of course, which myself and a couple of colleagues wrote up recently in the Canadian Journal of Archaeology. And interestingly, Wilson was in the cave, wrote his name, but didn't photograph that rock art, which would have been really handy, because that's it's really suffered badly over the years. A lot of it has fallen off, and we would love to have seen what was there in 1887 when he carved his name, or wrote it. He wrote it in the same way as they were making the rock art, which was he picked up a charcoal stick and used that because there were fires in this little cave. Just to show you some of the reason these early photographs are important, the upper left there is Wilson's photograph, and I've circled a headless anthropomorph, and you can see a crack working its way towards the lower legs of that individual. And then I've been back to that many, many times, and you can see 80 and 100 years later how the crack is now taking off pieces of the pictograph. The upper image that he shot shows you a lot more. I've narrowed it down, but I could do the same thing with other components in that photo. Many of the parts that he photographed are now spalling off. And in fact, that entire scene, if it's still there, last time I was there, it was not very long ago, I could get from about here to the wall of that scene. And the reason being, you can see in these other ones, you're standing right in front of it taking a photo. The river has completely cut away all the bank that was previously there that you would stand on, and now it's just fast-running Milk River water right up against the sandstone wall. So it won't be too long and all of that will be gone. The next photographs come quite a bit later, and as far as I know, Charles Sternberg, who's much better known for his paleontology than his connections to archaeology, but it so happens he was in Writing-on-Stone in 1915 and took photographs of a number of the rock art panels at that time. I suspect he was unaware of Wilson's work. Although paleontology was his interest, so he didn't do anything with these, but he supplied them to one of Canada's early and pioneering anthropologists, archaeologists, Harlan I. Smith, who was then with the Geological Survey, which later became National Museum of Man when it split off. He was in geology department, but he was the archaeologist essentially for the entire country. And a very respected colleague, and Sternberg sent him the photos, which then Smith converted to sketches, and he published in his book in 1923 on Album of Prehistoric Canadian Art. Mostly, there was very little in there from Alberta, but there was some. As far as I know, the next photographs that we have any record of are those taken by Douglas Leechman, and that's a name, again, many of you probably will have heard. He's got a Calgary connection. He was the first director of the Glenbow, Alberta Institute, as it was then known. He was the anthropologist at the National Museum of Man for almost 25 years, I believe, till about 1955 when he moved west. But he was a good anthropologist, and he was studying cultures on the West Coast, the Arctic, and many plains groups. And he had come to Alberta and was quite interested in rock art. And he took photographs of the Pekisko site, which you'll see in a little bit, and also the Okotoks site. And he wrote a very famous paper, which I'll mention in a moment. The first publication that really was sort of scholarly with quotes around it was by Reverend John McLean in 1896. in this Transactions of the Canadian Institute, where it's a very brief report and frankly wanders all over the place and doesn't say anything of any particular merit or interest until I think it's the very last or second last page. And given the title, Picture Writing of the Blackfoot Indians, you think something's going to come here, you know, and you work your way through it, and he goes all over the world, and you know. And then finally he says, you know, there are these wonderful writings on the Milk River. This is the first real professional reference. The things like, you know, the other publications were not aimed at a professional audience. It's interesting to note that he says the Indians say they were written by the spirits, but the better interpretation, I like that, you know, the better interpretation. Of course, and this continued on. Many subsequent ethnologists recorded people I'll mention in a moment. The Aboriginal viewpoint is, in many cases, the spirits made the rock art for them to read. However, many of them do recognize that there are different types of rock art, and there's spiritual, sacred rock art, and there's rock art that is not. And people make some, and spirits make others. So that was the first publication I came across, the first major ethnographic records that were done by anybody on rock art. And this is important work too, because this is where you're actually talking to the Aboriginal people, not just taking photographs or making sketches, and asking them in their own words, what does this stuff mean? Why did you do it? What does it tell us? And the first I'm aware of in terms of professional anthropology was the well-known Marius Barbeau, who worked again out of the National Museums in Ottawa, which went through many name changes. He interviewed Stoney Indians regarding the Zephyr Creek site and also regarding several rock art sites in the Crow's Nest Pass, and published that in the 1920s. And then there was the work of well-known Claude Schaefer, who was for many years the director of the Plains Indian Museum in Browning, Montana. He had several stints as director, but he was keenly interested in Blackfoot culture, wrote volumes and volumes on this extremely important work, on file at the Glenbow Institute, most of it. And again, many photographs as well, reams of this stuff. And most important for our purposes is that between about 1948 and 51, he conducted dedicated interviews with primarily South Piikani about the rock art of southern Alberta. Not all, most of it writing-on-stone, but not exclusively. And so, and he simply wrote down in his own handwriting their own words, and with no embellishment, no attempt to interpret or anything else. It's simply, this is what they said. And this makes an incredibly valuable record that we have today to refer to. And Hugh Dempsey is one of the people who did refer to it quite a bit. Hugh wrote an important volume called A History of Writing-on-Stone. The Parks, Alberta Parks commissioned him to do that in the early 1970s, and that is an unpublished volume, which I think probably should be published. It's full of some of his own personal interviews with Blackfoot people about the rock art and what it meant, and also quite a bit of citing, referencing of the work of Claude Schaefer. In terms of actual recording of rock art, I'm sure many of you have heard of Selwyn Dewdney, a very famous man. He was a well-known artist in his own right, and also quite an enthusiastic recorder of rock art in Eastern Canada, so much so that he became well known for that, and the Glenbow found out about him, hired him in 1960 to come out, and again in 62. He also recorded rock art in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and was assisted in Alberta by Don King, a name that's familiar to many of you as a kind of amateur assistant archaeologist who spent a lot of time with Dick Forbes. Selwyn Dewdney sketched about, I don't know the exact number, 12, 14 sites around the province, again counting writing-on-stone as one, and by no means did he do everything. He did a fair number of panels at writing-on-stone, but by no means a large percentage of what was there. His work is considered generally pretty good to this day, but now with the ability we have to see rock art now, we go back to these sites and we use our methods, newer methods. We can see things he missed or things he drew quite, a little bit wrong, or given what he was doing at the time, it's quite good work. And of course, remember, some of the stuff he was drawing doesn't exist anymore, so that makes it important as well for other reasons. First major publication on rock art in Alberta, aside from that John McLean thing, which was really a passing reference, was the Leechman et al. 1955 report, and still to this day stands as a really important first publication and they focus on southwestern Alberta, and that's really what they use. Remember, they didn't have Selwyn Dewdney's drawings at that time. Again, I'm not going to dwell on this for reasons of moving along, but I wanted to bring I think a lot of people don't know about this publication, or maybe hadn't looked at it in a long time. But Thelma Habgood, a name a few of you might recognize. She was Charlie Schwager's lab assistant for 20 or 30 years at the University of Alberta, a palynologist in her own right, but particularly interested in shamanism and mysticism. So she wrote about Alberta rock art. A whole volume of the review, or newsletter as it was then called, in 1967, was authored by her, and it was almost entirely a recapitulation of things that were known, using Dewdney's drawings and a lot from Leechman's earlier publication, but draw your attention to her comments. She went to the Grotto Canyon site. It was the only one of two that she visited to write this article. And at Grotto Canyon, she saw things that it seemed like no one else saw for about 30 years after that. And that was something she referred to as a flute-like player and the Kachina-like dolls and dancing figures and things that once we had enhanced methods of viewing rock art, Magny and Klassen wrote up as a very good article, I thought, on what are clearly, I think, what relations between that area and southwestern U.S. in terms of rock art styles. I don't think there's any doubt about it. But I think Thelma deserves some credit that a lot of people may have overlooked. Moving up in time, certainly a critical study of rock art in Alberta was that done by Jim Keyser. He was hired by Parks in 1976 to come to Writing-on-Stone and do as much as he could do for as long as the money lasted. And he's such a dedicated and enthusiastic guy with rock. He just kept going. And he was all the way up to Verdigray Coulee and Hefner Coulee and Police Coulee and Rocky Coulee and you name it. He was all over the place. He recorded, I think, something close to 60 individual sites, and many of which consist of many, many different panels, much more than he was really hired to do. And that work was then published as the first lead article in the first lead volume, Volume 1 of the Canadian Journal of Archaeology, and stands to this day as probably one of the most important things we have on rock art in Alberta. Jim continues to produce enormous amounts of work, not in Alberta anymore, but in other places. I also put up here a picture of the Story on Stone publication that the Archaeological Society produced back in 1980. There's very little text in that. It's mostly captions and photographs from around southern Alberta. Continuing to move up in time, we have the work of Michael Klassen. Many of you in the room know him. He's been with us a number of times as speakers. He lived here for many years, worked at Writing-on-Stone, did his master's there, published many papers. He had a grant to go around and look at virtually every rock art site he could get to in 1990, 91. That was, maybe it was 92, 93. Very important project because it gave us kind of a status at that point of what rock art, what it was like and what kind of conditions sites were in. He continues to be active to this day, although he's based out of BC now. Marty Magny, Michael Turney, I won't spend too long on these guys. Michael Turney is more of kind of a volunteer with Michael Klassen for many years and got very interested in rock art. And since then has been hired either by us, that is Culture, or Parks, to continue a rock art monitoring project at Writing-on-Stone that I regard as very important. And of course, Marty was very active in rock art for a number of years, published a number of important papers, but more of your thinker in the chair kind of guy, not so much field work for Marty. Now I'm gonna, where was I there? Yeah, where are we going here? Did I miss one? No, sorry. I'm going to quickly look at a few of the trends of things that are changing rock art for us and giving us new ways of seeing what we, in many cases, had simply not seen before at all. You heard me mention Dstretch, and I know many of you have seen papers before with that term mentioned. Here are paired examples, both from Okotoks, of, on the left, regular photography, and on the right, Dstretch photography. Dstretch is a software program developed by a guy out of California who had an interest in rock art. He was an amateur archaeologist interested in rock art. It uses various algorithms in ways that I don't claim to understand nor feel any need to. And But it works, and you can click all kinds of buttons and fool around and bring out reds, greens, blues, blacks, and so on. And it has been a real game changer in rock art research and rock art studies, rock art recording, finding sites, recording sites, and you name it. So you can see here what it can do for just enhancing what we can already see. It helps us find things we didn't know were there. This is back at Okotoks. This is an east-facing piece of rock that I had never noticed anything on. But in the top left, you might see there's some graffiti there, of which has been a huge problem. This little black writing with a felt pen. And so we're about to take that off, so I was doing some photographs. And then I Dstretch that, and that's over on the right side, which a lot of that is iron staining. It's very common in the Okotoks erratic, well, all the erratics train. And the white arrows actually point out the various iron stains, but then look down below, which is a blow-up of Dstretch to part of that, and what you see is classic vertical series rock art. This is letter-like things, H's, backward letters, H's, upside down L's, E's that are backwards, and so on. X's, much the same as on the rest of the face of Okotoks and on another site I'm going to show you in a minute. So Dstretch helps us find things we had never found as well. Here's the Williams Cooley site. On the top in the center are these two very faint figures. You can almost only see them now with Dstretch. They're quite a ways away from the main Williams, well, about 75 meters from the main panels. And on the left, in that black circle, is just to the left of those two figures. And most of us who had been there had never really looked over there. And one of my photographs happened to be not centered very well, and then I Dstretched it and I found the guy on the right. This pot-bellied character, yeah, you explain that to me, I don't know. Pot-bellied figure that looks like it may be holding a rattle or something, and no one knew it was there. And so this is what is happening thanks to things like Dstretch. The bottom, I won't belabor, it's Rattlesnake Cave, where we found black pictographs drawn with simply black sticks with charcoal. And only recently did we notice there's actually red added to them, in this case blood, as in the drawing. There's a shot through and through wound through the rider of the horse, and there's a spear delivered to the throat of the horse. But what we hadn't seen was there's blood spurting out of all of this. It was because we just hadn't seen the red. This is from a recent trip to Writing-on-Stone where I was investigating a rock fall, and I was shooting a picture. If you look high, I don't think this, high up here, you'll see some very faint little pecked lines, scratch lines with holes and things. These are little human characters. And I photographed that, but I thought I saw some red staining. I mean, you can see it's almost non-existent. But look at over on the right, when you Dstretch it, there's a character there. That it really makes you realize we need to go back to so many sites and apply this technique and just start all over again. And because we're seeing that they were using where we thought there were just petroglyphs like at Writing-on-Stone in many places. They're not. There's petroglyphs with red all over them. And Michael Turney's work at Writing-on-Stone has been showing that as well. An interesting project that I want to mention was that done by Brad Himour of Parks Canada in the Calgary office, just about the only guy left in the Calgary office. Brad has an interest in rock art and was using Dstretch to go around southern Alberta, southern BC, record sites, and then bring them to the attention of Aboriginal groups. So he was really bringing in the native component, getting them to help interpret rock art and using Dstretch because they could finally see some of the things that we had not been previously aware of. And his work made national news a couple of years ago, and many of you probably saw it. I wanted to make a note of the technique known as cross-polarization, because the Archaeological Society here was involved in a number of early pioneering studies to bring Mr. Henderson up. Jim Henderson was the guy who kind of developed this, sold himself, I must admit, quite well. And but notice these two figures here. These are both these are instances where the Dstretch is on your left, but the cross-polarization is on your right. And the areas I've circled on the top, that's a bear claw, very clearly a bear claw, but it doesn't show up at all as a bear claw in the Dstretched image. You need to see the polarized light one to see that. And then once you see it, there's 100 of these in Alberta, and they're exactly like that. It's a bear claw. And then on the lower one, that's another place at Okotoks where you have to, again, get down, look underneath the ledge, And there's this human figure person standing to the left and this spinning wheel thing to the right. And we've all seen that many times, this spinning wheel thing. Well, there's actually two, one right on top of the other. But it doesn't show up very well with Dstretch. If you look at the cross-polarized light one over in here, there's the second one right there. It's virtually a clone, the exact same thing there. It's just very hard to see. So there's a place for other techniques here. Not one thing has a monopoly on this, and that polarized light technique has worked very well. Brian, I'm probably running late, aren't I? No, he says 5 minutes. Standard response. He said, Jack, you're doing great. Take as much time as you need. I'm cool with that. Laser scanning is a major technique for both recording rock art and for doing things like studying changes in rock art and erosion rates and things like that. And it's being used in Alberta for both of those. We now have a number of laser scans of rock art from writing-on-stone. A number of, probably 4 or 5 major panels have been completely scanned now, which means when panels fall down, which they do, we would actually be able to replace it. We could make almost exact copies with the digital data that we have from these laser scans. I'd like to keep doing a lot more of that. It's expensive, but I think techniques will be seeing equipment come out that is a lot more affordable. It already is. We recently just did a major scan at Okotoks. We scanned the entire Okotoks erratic, everything except the bottom pretty much, and some of the inside where all the little breaks and everything are. This is a pretty complicated job with, this was not done with super high resolution because you can't work at that scale. So resolution here is probably to about 1 centimeter of scale, except where we got to the rock art places, and then we tried to do far better than that. So that's the top image there gives you an idea of the scan, three-dimensional scan of the Okotoks erratic, of which I have a little model on my desk now, and I'm going to make copies and sell them in the parking lot of people off of Okotoks. We have a snow globe, you know. And down below you can see examples of a photograph of the rock art on your left, Dstretched of course, and then a laser scan of the rock on your right. And the first thing I want you to notice is on the left, for those of you who haven't been there and looked at it carefully maybe in the last few years, is look at the amount of red there. And that red, almost all of what you see there is red ochre. That's just being smeared on that rock with hands. And I'll show you again in a minute here the actual hand prints and things. If you have any doubts, those will, I think, vanish fairly soon. And you can see the quality of the reproduction in the laser scan, especially in terms of three-dimensional aspect of the rock. It really shows up quite well how three-dimensionally they capture it. The red, don't let that fool you. They're not that good at it yet with the laser scanning technology. What they do is they take my photographs and they're able to superimpose them exactly to where they belong because of the way they record point provenience, which I could not explain to you. Another part of ongoing, the future of rock art research is simply new discoveries. We keep discovering new rock art almost every year. I'd say there's a new discovery, and I think there will be for quite some time. It could be in a nook and a cranny, it could be around a corner, it could be just over your head. You look up for the first time, you walk 5 feet from the last place you looked, and you, for some reason, never went that way before. And I think we'll discover rock art for quite a long time still. I don't think by any means the sites have all been recorded, especially when you consider the Rocky Mountains, the inaccessibility, and the lack of people who have gone and looked, who were actually looking for it. This is just a recent example from an area of the Milk River outside of writing-on-Stone. A small cavern that kind of calls to you, you know, you see that and you think, well, better go look in there. And sure enough, there's some stick figures. There's a bear claw over here, there's some anthropomorphs, quite a few what are called tally marks. And on the right, there's some red ochre splotches on the ceiling, which I couldn't do anything with Dstretch other than make red ochre splotches. So I don't know what they were. But anyway, we'll continue to make some new discoveries by what we call the old method of shoe leather, walking around. I wanted to mention this one. Some of you may recall, what was it, 2011, I think, maybe? Quite a bit of news, including national news, headline news in the national media out of Toronto, on the desecration of a rock art site in Alberta where drills, acid, power, something or other, nuclear explosions had apparently been let off. And so it just so happened I was in the field, so I was the handy guy to call and say, Jack, get over there and see what the hell this is all about. And so our crew did that, and that is the rock. It's called the Glenwood Erratic. It's on a Hutterite farm, and quite well protected, I might add, by the Hutterites. On the upper right there, you're looking at the crew on top of the rock, which is where the damage was said to have taken place. What we found indeed were drill holes. Other than that, we could not find any evidence of damage, intentional damage, nor any evidence of rock art. The damage had been done by geologists who were coring the rock to get samples for dating, which they did and published in 1995. As part of it is a paper about the erratics train and the origins and history of it and so forth. But while I was there, I started walking around the outside of the rock, 15 feet down from that ladder that you saw. Oh, you didn't see it, but you can see, I took that one out. You can see the size there. Once you start walking around it, you start seeing some places where it looks for all the world, I think I see a little red here. And you can again compare the Dstretch and non-Dstretch. It's quite faint, it's not easy to see. And the day I was there doing this, I did not notice any new rock art. But on getting back, if you look up here at the top, with the naked eye, that's uncorrected. And I could see something was happening, so I de-stretched that, and you're starting to get what looked like some round figures. And something up here is starting to look like a letter or two. Does that sound familiar? Erratics, you know, the erratics train. And then you de-stretch that and look, no, what's this over here? And then that's a close-up of that. And what you've got is a new vertical series site, the Glenwood Erratic. The irony being, of course, that there is rock art at the Glenwood Erratic. It just wasn't where that person thought it was, and it wasn't being destroyed by anybody. So, but thanks to that, we have a new rock art site, and I have a feeling we're going to find a lot more of that on erratics train sites in Alberta. We already know Staveley and other sites have that as well. I want to conclude here with a few remarks about the not so fun parts, and that is rock art that we lose or that people destroy. And this is unfortunately part of the ongoing trends we're going to see in the future as well. I don't see any immediate stop to it. Erosion is unstoppable. And this was a recent, I just went out and recorded this 2014. On the big slide here on the left, you can see the amount of rubble. That is all new, just rubble's come down. And tucked in that little tiny corner are those two very tall, long, tall anthropomorphs, part of a site called DGOV 49. And those got spared, but not everything else to the left of that did. There was some other rock art over there. This is clearly unstoppable geology. There's nothing we can do about this. I believe on a smaller scale, there are some things that could be done to slow down, retard, delay erosional processes. I've worked on that for a number of years. A very critical issue is whether or not Aboriginal communities want that to happen. And that, I think, will remain to be seen over the coming years as we continue to discuss that. Just another picture of Pine Coulee there and erosion and loss of that. I should advise you to close your eyes for the next minute here. If you haven't already seen this, it's the saddest instance of vandalism I have ever witnessed. This is the Pictographs site, Mystic Cave, as it's often called, one of the ones that Leechman visited and reported on back in the 1940s. And it's quite remote, quite inaccessible. Not many people have been to it. I've only been twice in my life. And I think it was BV who called me and said, we got some bad news here. And I'm not going to put any blame because we don't know who did it, but that's what it looks like inside now. Somebody went in with a spray can and didn't just spray in their name or initials, which is common. They went around each and every individual red ochre image and sprayed like a silver car paint over on top of it. I've never seen anything like that, and hope I never do again. I brought an expert in graffiti removal to the site, and we talked about trying to implement something to maybe remove that. The trick, of course, is to not damage the red ochre. In the process of doing that, it's going to be particularly hard because it's on the inside of a cave down-facing. It is not getting weathered. It is not getting mineral deposits over the top. The red ochre is literally right on the little outer-facing surfaces of down-facing sand grains. And getting that paint off, I see people shaking their heads, probably for good reason. I really need to wrap this up. Okotoks Vandalism in the extreme at that place, especially escalated. The last 10 years or so have been just horrendous. I'm just including a few shots here. I could go on for the entire rest of the evening with atrocity shots. I just want to point out that one in the upper left. That was shot in January of 2015 on I don't remember if it was a weekday or not. Shot by an Alberta culture employee who happened to be passing by. And so this is what the traffic you're getting in a January day. Now, mind you, it wasn't brutally cold, or you wouldn't get that. But and look how many people are on the rock. You know, what do? We got signs that say don't climb the rocks. We have a little low rope barrier around it, which admittedly isn't much, but it kind of gives across the idea. Okay, I'm probably not supposed to go there. And we could put a higher fence and a stronger fence, which somebody will pull down with a pickup one night and a winch and a bunch of yahoos and four-wheel drives. And you can put up then a stronger one, and pretty soon you have this isolated thing in the middle of a fortress, of which it has completely lost all of its context on the landscape of why people went here in the first place and made rock art. You could put a building around it. You could do like the Peterborough petroglyphs, which probably was a mistake in many ways. Anyway, I'm just raising this to show you there are very big complex issues. I want to just leave you with just a comment about how we can in fact do something about this, and I don't recommend it. We used some high pressure water sprayers to remove graffiti, and we did it in some cases. If you can look at the upper and lower right, you can see the letter K of the word punk, and there are clear hand swipes of red ochre in that on that scene there. And so what I did was I had them work the spray unit while I carefully recorded everything they were doing and kept stopping them and checking. And as I said, this is not sustainable and I don't recommend it, but we were doing it as an experiment to see, can we remove this paint and have some integrity to the red ochre, and it appeared to be successful, but I wouldn't want to try it again. And in fact, now we've gone to a new method of removing paint that doesn't involve high pressure spray. It's a chemical that's put on with a soft sponge and washed with a very gentle hose. But Okotoks is just a lingering problem that's gone on for a long time. There's been site meetings out there with Blackfoot people, with the RCMP, with town managers. Blair Firstrider, who works with our department, has been working with the school curricula to try and give lectures and take kids from Okotoks to the site. And I like to think we're going to make some progress in the long run, but it's a long haul, it's a long run. Williams Coulee, I just wanted to make a note of many of you, some of you know the site of Williams Coulee. Relatively, 15, 12, 17-year-old discovery or something like that. And we just bought it from the landowner, so we own that site now, the government of Alberta. And I'm really happy about that. It gives us a much better management of the site, controlling access and so on. And it's a spectacular site. It's got great rides. It's small, one little cavern primarily. You're looking at a fair bit of it in those images. But it's a great site. The images are well protected there. And it even has potential to do some excavation because there's a floor there that has some soft dirt, and you can actually see rock art circles and things going into the dirt where they disappear, so they're partially buried. There's undoubtedly red ochre around on the ground, possibly painting tools or who knows what. So that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Thank you very much.